Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thrive with Kate. I'm here with David McConaughey, who is a friend and a colleague and runs the Colorado Ayurveda Conference, or Colorama. And you can find what we're going to talk about at Colorado Ayurveda Conference. And Dave and I met through my yoga health coaching program, which later became Wellness Pro Academy. David McConaughey is also known as Veda Dave, and he's a board certified advanced Ayurveda practitioner and a Vedic astrologer and a wild mind guide. And we're going to just talk a lot about the topic of the conference this year, which is happening not until October. So we're getting a jump on this because I know if you're like me, you want to know a bit of what's on your calendar in advance so that you can make it all fit together. So the Colorado event is October 2nd to 5th in 2025. And the topic, and I jumped at it right away, is Indigenous Ayurveda, celebrating ancestral forms of nature-based medicine. So welcome to the show, Steve.
Hey, thanks, Kate. Happy to be here. Good to see you as always. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's talk about like what is Ayurveda for people who've never heard of it, and then what is this concept of Indigenous Ayurveda?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ayurveda is a nature-based form of medicine that originates in the Indian subcontinent. And so that's what we currently know as India, but also Pakistan, Afghanistan, that whole region. It gave rise to this way of understanding and moving through the world, eating seasonal foods, food as medicine, herbs as the key healing allies. And so really it gives rise to this theme of the conference, thinking about, okay, yeah, what is Ayurveda? And it's indigenous medicine. It's, living in tune with the seasons. Like, what has it been to be human on Earth for millennia? And, we live near the ocean or in a forest or on a mountain, and food grows on trees. Medicine rises up out of the earth, and we learn to cultivate and find, oh, this plant is good for this. This food is in season right now, so this is what we eat. And there are these natural rhythms to the seasons, to life cycles, and throughout the day. So in a lot of ways, Ayurveda is circadian medicine, or also infradian and ultradian, right? Cycles within the day, cycles of the day, circadian around the day, and then the infradian, the longer cycles throughout the seasons and the year and life cycles. And so this is what it's been to be human on Earth, to survive and thrive in tune with nature, understanding that the elements that compose the reality around us, ether, air, fire, water, earth, are also moving through us within our bodies and our minds. And so to figure out how to play in that dance in a skillful way is what Ayurveda is all about. And it doesn't take much of a leap to recognize that that's also what Native American cultures were doing. That's also what indigenous people in Central and South America and Africa and Nordic countries and all throughout the world, that's what humans have been doing on Earth for all of our existence. And so the theme of this conference arises from wanting to get to those very roots of Ayurveda. We are the Colorado Ayurvedic Medical Association, after all, but also celebrate the similarities and get curious about the idiosyncrasies of these different systems and these different nature-based ways of knowing, and understand, okay, Chinese medicine also has 5 elements, but they've got a different set of 5 elements and slightly different ways of working with them. Indigenous cultures in North America also have a set of elements and the medicine wheel throughout the seasons. And so how does that interact with, and how is that in conversation with the Ayurvedic traditions? So that's really the trajectory, or the curiosity that we're exploring in this conference this year.
Yeah, when I was writing On Inflamed, or what became also Primal Habits, that language that we have used, that our ancestors, regardless of our tradition, were using like a conceptual understanding of elements. So this is not periodic table elements. This is an element as a concept of earth, water, fire, air, ether, or whether we use those same terms in slightly other words in certain circumstances, like wood in Chinese medicine, or metal, right? There's this understanding of a concept of like relating to the relationships between these elements or these concepts, and that it's tangible and accessible to everyone. And that these like these words, these same concepts, these same words, which also turn into directions, that they're just part, like you're saying, they're just part of human consciousness. This is not something that is specific to a specific culture, time, place. So what I
Yeah.
love in what you guys are doing is like you're bringing that part back in. Because what I've noticed, and I've had, I mean, I feel like I always have an axe to grind, a few axes in the fire to grind. But like one of my axes to grind with Ayurveda and with Ayurveda conferences is like this attachment to it being connected to the Indian continent and culture and plant medicines that are there. And I'm like, you guys are missing it. Like you're missing Ayurveda just means life wisdom. That's it. That's it. And yes, it's going to be relative to every time, place, culture, cuisine, ecosystem, right? It's always going to be relative. But the wisdom tradition that understands the play of these elements in such a sophisticated way from Ayurveda, which also we should mention co-arose with yoga, that we can't really separate yoga wisdom and yoga philosophy and the yogic path to enlightenment from Ayurveda, that wisdom is not ecosystem driven.
Yeah.
Right. It's planetary. And that's why all these different cultures, and it seems like you and me are just like on that same wavelength and trying to bring that into the Ayurvedic practitioner community and trying to bring that into the people who just love Ayurveda for self-wisdom community.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, in the naming of the Indigenous, this conference says Indigenous Ayurveda, celebrating ancestral forms of nature-based medicine. Is this like how did that come about? What were some of the conversations?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll come to that, but just to touch on what you just said, I think you're absolutely right that we're on the same page, and always for me walking that line between honoring the tradition, honoring the unbroken lineage of masters that do come through the Indian subcontinent, through Indian culture, and the unique geopolitical history of that area of the world that has allowed this system of knowledge to be preserved in a way where, through various settler colonial practices, a lot of the Native American wisdom has been wiped out and not preserved, at least in written form, that we can transmit in a widespread way. And so many other traditions throughout the world have not survived as intact as Ayurveda has. And so absolutely wanting to honor and respect and express gratitude to that specific tradition, while also recognizing, in those classical texts, which are miraculously preserved all these centuries later, Shroot specifically says, hey, here's one example, specific example to demonstrate the larger principle, and the intelligent practitioner will extrapolate and figure it out based on that principle, depending on ecosystem, time of life. One of the Ayurvedic aphorisms is all substances are both medicine and poison, depending on context, who's using it in what dosage, when, where, how is it prepared, all these contextual choices which are dependent upon the in the moment awareness and intelligence of whoever is using it. And so Ayurveda in Colorado in 2025 is appropriately different than Ayurveda in the south of India 10,000 years ago. That, there's different circumstances, different applications. And so you and I are definitely on the slightly rebellious side of the Ayurvedic traditionalist, but it is getting to that universal understanding of the principles of Ayurveda and yoga and Samkhya philosophy is really what we're talking about, apply equally well here and now as they do on Mars 20,000 years from now, as they do in India 10,000 years ago. These are the basic constituents of material reality as we are capable of perceiving it through our 5 and more senses. And so these, and it just, what you're talking about, elements as concepts, these are archetypal constructs, right? They are outside of time and space, but they then shape or influence the way that specific material realities arise. What you said about the periodic table of elements, if anybody's interested, my master's thesis is specifically titled The Periodic Table of Ayurvedic Elements. And when I was doing my Ayurveda training, I was so interested. It's like, wait, so the most ancient traditional knowledge we have says all of reality is composed of some conglomeration of these five elements. And modern science says that all of material reality is composed of some dance of this periodic table of elements. There's got to be a Rosetta Stone to translate between these two. And sure enough, there is. And that's what my whole thesis is about. So
Can we link it? Can we link it in the show notes? Can we?
absolutely. So
Okay.
on my website, vedadave.com, there's the inner physics starter kit. And there's 6 hours of little bite-sized videos going into how all that works and the sacred geometry of it and all that. So it's shameless self-promo, but
No, perfect. We'll link it in the show notes. No, that's great. I look forward to diving into that, Dave. I have not. So I mean, the reason I chose Ayurveda as the healing path that I would become, I don't want to say an expert in, but that I would dedicate my life to developing expertise in is maybe more appropriate, whatever that was close to 30 years ago. Oh my God, where does the time go? Was like, I'll never get to the bottom of it, like it was so profound and deep. And I could see and I was choosing, and it's not like Chinese medicine. It's not like none of these other indigenous medicines are, they all are. But for me, there was just this resonance of something in the Sanskrit language that helped me understand my own complexity of health issues, my own complexity of enlightenment consciousness issues in a way that was so articulate. But I want to actually bring back to the accessibility and practicality of what you guys are doing with Indigenous Ayurveda, or what I was trying to do and writing Primal Habits, which is that we don't need it. Like no one needs anything you don't already have. Like even if you're in a city, even if, whether you're in the country, whether you're in like a depleted ecosystem, that there's this level of we all have access to sky and earth and light or fire, right? Like we have access. I mean, and I get that not everybody has access to clean water. I get that. So I might say that we might not all have access, while most of the people listening do have access. And what we want for everyone is to have access to these five elements. And that when we're in this experiential relationship with elements, that we draw support from this idea of like we're intrinsically supported. This is what I believe our ancestors were tapping into when they were talking about earth and sky and fire and the four directions and water and ether space. They were tapped into that. It can pull who I am. I can pull like my consciousness in that which is arising in my physiology, like the earth element in my physiology, the fire element in my physiology, which might show up as blood or digestion, or that I can actually be in right relationship with the sun outside and the fire within, with the sky and space outside and the space of the breath inside my body, that we're not needing an intermediary. It's like the opposite of needing. It's interesting how like the priests were the doctors, and we see this across all traditions. The priests were the shamans, were the doctors, were the medicine men. Even they were the barbers in medieval culture. The barbers were the surgeons. They had sharp instruments, right? And so we see this across cultures, right? Where like I'm not saying there's not a need for expertise, and it's not amazing to have a shaman or a guide or a guru. It's saying that yes, and you in relationship with the cosmos, you in relationship with the sun and the water and the earth and the air, and like that is where direct healing comes from.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you. When I started to stumble into this particular wisdom tradition and was understanding yoga philosophy and Ayurveda and Vedic astrology as this coherent understanding of how the whole cosmos works, but then also how that shows up in my own body. It was this endless rabbit hole, this infinitely mysterious path, which also has very concrete support systems to guide you along the way. And the primary things, yeah, without an intermediary, has been an access point for deep self-compassion, self-understanding, and acceptance. And what radiates out from that is love and understanding for others. It's like, okay, that person's not spacey. They've just got a lot of vata going on. And here's all the gifts that come with that. And oh, beautiful. And I'm not an angry person. I just have a lot of pitta. And that gives me like passion and leadership and vision and all that too. And I just need a little ghee and coconut oil to smooth out the sharper sides of that. And what you're saying, like, it really is this beautifully simple but infinitely complex system of pattern recognition. And why is it that there are too many people in this country and around the world that don't have access to clean water? Like, how is that possible? Well, it's this forgetting and the lack of access to this understanding of how the elements move and relate to one another, both within ourselves and in the environment around us. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this topic is, again, our indigenous ancestors lived in intimate relationship with the natural world and the dance of the elements, and were able to steward the forests and the rivers and the animal populations for tens of thousands of, way beyond all of history in a relatively sustainable and regenerative way. Graham Hancock has great research showing the Amazon rainforest is not a random expression of nature. It was cultivated. The Amazon rainforest is the world's largest garden.
Yeah.
And so that's not a mistake. That's the result of this deep intelligence moving through humans in relationship with the natural world. And so the fact that we have developed a society and global systems that create polluted water and desecrated earth and stripping topsoil is a misalignment of that intelligence and a disconnection from these ancestral roots and the systems, the natural systems, nature's one universal coordinating system that sustains and generates life. And so when we talk about using this phrase, this word indigenous, and connecting it, indigenous Ayurveda, as a board, we send out a survey to our members and like, hey, here's 5 potential topics for the conference this year. And what are you interested in? What's at the cutting edge of your curiosity? And it came back overwhelmingly in favor of this idea of indigenous Ayurveda. And I will say, as white guy in Colorado, to be putting on a conference called Indigenous Ayurveda feels really edgy, really edgy. And of course we've been in consultation with our Native American friends and please help us do this in a good way and do it in a way that's respectful and honoring as opposed to extractive and all that. And so we're striving in that direction. And also I'm definitely going to make more mistakes, but I'm of the firm belief that to be in the conversation is the most important thing. And do I say messy things sometimes? Absolutely. But is my heart in the right place? And are we doing our best to bring this wisdom to the fore? Yes. And so again, this is an edgy thing to say, and the specific languaging of it can be somewhat controversial, but it is my understanding that you don't have to go back many generations to recognize that each and every single one of us is an indigenous earthling. We were all born here on the planet. And here we are, a bunch of earthlings trying to figure out how to survive and thrive together. And so in claiming that, obviously as distinct from claiming, membership or citizenship in a native tribe and that tradition, understanding ourselves as indigenous earthlings, it opens up this set of possibilities where exactly okay, what is my personal relationship to the water, to the sky, to the sun and the Agni within me? And that's really the set of conversations I want to have to reconnect where the connection has been lost. That, yeah, as a white Westerner or, wherever you're from, have the capacity and in a lot of ways I don't want to say responsibility, but in these trying times where there's all this wonkiness going on in the world, what is your access point to healing yourself, healing your family systems and the culture as a whole? It's cultivating that individual relationship, and a whole web of connections and compassion arises out of that. And that suggests right action in terms of what you're putting in your body, how you're taking care of yourself, how you're taking care of the land and the people around you. And there's this, I imagine and pray that there's this sort of fractalized effect where, that micro action, that microscopic shift in awareness radiates out and can gradually bring about about, the more beautiful world we know is possible.
Yeah, amen to that. I mean, I watched this video the other day. It was like a minute short from a leading behavioral scientist. And they were talking about how, like, to actually, for human to make change, like behavioral change, something has to shift in tribe. And so what you're describing in that like contact higher, those micro actions is like, you think different, you do something different. Maybe you learn to locally harvest, some plants and become a regenerative part of your ecosystem. And just by you doing that, and someone talks to you that day and you're like, oh yeah, you can chew on some pine needles, like that then someone then does that and realizes that, wait, wow, there's more, like they just feel that antioxidant high of that plant medicine in their body. And now they have more of a connection to their ecosystem. And the more we're all connected, actually, that's why I got into Ayurveda in the first place, is I felt like it was more, because I came from an international environmental, like, basically like a climate plus background of how do we just have international environmental policies that protect the earth for living beings. And
Radical. Hey, that's a
radical. It was radical.
crazy
Went
idea.
straight from there into Ayurveda. That part was a little radical. But like just that sense of the more we're each connected to our ecosystem, if we just look at the planet as a series of ecosystems, and I get that like people in Dubai or in these places that are like largely, were uninhabitable before technology. Now technology is bridging the gap. So like now that's might be high metal element in Chinese medicine. Like there's always where there's life, that is an ecosystem, and humans are ecosystems. And that as we become more aware of how we are being nourished, right, whether it's through water, or through food, or through medicine, and like, well, where did that grow? And what is that source of that? So I feel like what you're doing and what really, for me, was so edgy and controversial like 20 some years ago was around. So I was an Ayurvedic practitioner and I was stocking like 100 herbs, mostly from India. So I'd import them. And I'm like, this is so wrong. I don't really know the plants that are growing outside my front door. And so I dedicated a lot of time and energy into learning the plants that grow outside my front door and starting to use those in plant medicines. And I stopped importing and I really landed on the relationship. Like, what is the relationship we're having with plant medicines? And it's so easy right now to be like sold a supplement. And I have people on my podcast that's all they do is they sell a miracle cure supplement. And there's some value to that. So I don't want to completely discredit that. But what I have found much greater value in is relationship of self to plant medicine, of self to the five elements, of self to the living organisms around us. And in that, there's a fullness, or this word in Sanskrit of pranatva. There's a sense of an inner support. And we're suffering so much right now, I would say, as a human culture around the globe, largely due to capitalism. And I'm also a capitalist. I'm like all over the board and completely contradictory, is that with that support from within, feel it makes us not need things as much from out there, or feel that thing out there is going to give me the sense of that fullness that I want to feel inside, whether it's some like miracle cure or like a new pair of shoes or whatever. And I feel like with what you guys are doing with Indigenous Ayurveda is a desire to restore that connection of relationship to element, to ecosystem, and ultimately to being able to access consciousness within each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the whole like, what is it called? Cultural appropriation stuff. I feel like as a culture, and this is just my own little, I don't know, probably too radical, right, for a lot of you. It's like, can we just like get over it and just get to the essence of like, there's a lot of wisdom. It comes from a lot of different places and we all have a lot to learn from each other. So like when I was reading Lame Deer, who's one of my favorite Indigenous Native American healers of yesteryear, and the writings are so horrific. It's so hard to read Native American, or First People's stories because of all the trauma. Like the trauma is so severe, is so insanely horrific that you can't touch into those medical systems without the depth of the eye-opening experience of the trauma that we as white people have persecuted. It's so intense, right? But in there, it's like when I read his stories of becoming the healer, we see this, I see the same parallels of like at the 11th hour by Swami Rama, who is one of the great Vedic enlightened beings of the last century from India. And the stories parallel in terms of isolation, forced isolation. So we always see this this person who's part of the culture needs to leave the culture, needs to be directly in the elements, needs to learn directly from nature without an intermediate. There's no intermediaries, and they're able to take a few things. If they're able to take a security blanket from the grandmother if they need it. So it's always the same. It's always the second generation up. Mother has the earth, and like the Aya in ayahuasca, that great Aya, that great mother being the divine mother, whatever we want to Pachamama, whatever we want to call her, that there's always that energy. If you need a little security blanket, it's her. That's what you're tapping into, is that, and you're alone. Right. And then when I look at back to lame deer and understanding a microbiome, because I think what we are missing in these ancient forms, our ancestors, is they don't use the same terminology that we use. They all use terrain theory, not germ theory. So that's important to recognize. So when we're talking about terrain theory, we're talking about microbiome health. That's important to recognize. We have a new term. We have a new word. So people like you and I, and I'm guessing many of the speakers at Indigenous Ayurveda, as we're translating. So we're saying, like, we know you're calling this science. Okay. This is what that looked like then. And then this is how they were using it then. And I just love this story in Lame Deer's book about the killing of the buffalo and the first thing that they would eat out of the buffalo. And so here we have a hunter-gatherer culture, right? So when you hunt, you're hungry. There, you're in a fasted state and you're hungry. Otherwise, you're not on the hunt. Like, it doesn't that. So we would hunt in a fasted state, and we know that a fasted state gives us acuity, and it runs us on brown fat. So we have more thermogenesis. So we have more climate adaptability, right? And we're also able to just like pace for longer. We're less like in blood sugar metabolism. We're less getting like these sugar spikes, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Okay, so they hunt together. They kill the buffalo. First thing they take out of the buffalo is the intestine, and they eat the intestine with the fat. And that sounds totally nuts unless you understand terrain theory from any indigenous culture and understand that they're replenishing all of these microbes in the anupana, or the delivery mechanism they're using for that, is a lot of fat. And so they're purging their own liver and gallbladder. So they're detoxing their physiology before then they eat the flesh or the meat. And so it's like these concepts that are so rich that the only way we can get that, and we're not seeing buffalo hunts happening in the Indus Valley, but there's something that the Indus Valley can learn from lame deer stories from 100 years ago. And that's true whether we're Nordic or South American or wherever, whatever our skin color, whatever words we're using to describe terrain theory or microbiome theory or eubiosis or all that. And what we have to learn from each other. I feel like you guys have your finger on the pulse with that, with the whole concept around this conference.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. And what you touched on, it all comes back to relationship, right? When I talk about science, like Einstein demonstrated conclusively that we live in a relational cosmos. The universe is relative, right? And you cannot know where one thing is except in relation to another. And whether that is your microbiome, all the trillions of organisms that compose the whole thing that is your body, a whole composed of parts, each of which are whole unto themselves and composed of parts all the way up, all the way down. Eating the intestines makes so much sense because, those buffalo have been grazing on the grass that comes from the soil of the land that you're on. So the soil has its own microbiome, grows the grass, the buffaloes eat that gets into their gut, and then you're going to eat that, and then all of a sudden, like, your gut is in direct relationship with the land that you're walking on, and it's a benevolent cycle. And so a big theme of the conference that's arising is, yes, it's place-based medicine. So we've got this woman, Asia Dorsey, who's of African heritage, lives in Denver, and is an herbalist. Her thing is bugs, bones, and botany. And she's this brilliant woman. And her talk, as I understand it, as is planned so far, she's going to talk about the importance of including red meat in your diet if you're living in Colorado. And that's Ayurvedic. That makes good, solid Ayurvedic sense. And so many of us associate, yoga and Ayurveda with veganism, vegetarianism. And if you're living in a tropical jungle in South India, like lots of fruit and grains and vegetables, brilliant. That's appropriate to that ecosystem. But if you're living in high desert plain, high altitude, you need that solidity and that grounding of red meat. And that's what seasonally moves through that land in theory, not so much anymore. And so I will say that this whole theme was really, the spark of it was inspired from our last conference, which was, the theme was trauma informed Ayurveda. And so through a friend, through my web of relationships, I connected with this woman, Dana Thompson, who's an Indigenous woman from Minnesota, and she's the co-founder of a restaurant called Owamni, which is a James Beard award-winning restaurant, and they do all traditional foods. It's all, local.
This is Minnesota, right?
This
Is
is,
she in
yeah, it's
Minnesota?
in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And so we got to talking, and I was thinking like, oh, like, please come and speak at our conference about trauma informed holistic health. And she was like, well, we first got on the phone and she's like, well, I don't know anything about Ayurveda. Like, is that going to be okay? I was like, well, let's see. Let's just talk about, what's your scope of knowledge and expertise and experience. And we then talked about Ayurveda for an hour. We didn't use any Sanskrit, but she was talking about local diets, local food, and how seasonal diets impact health and microbiome, and the connection, the importance of a connection of the people with the land and the cultivation of food and ancestral diets. And she told this story about, going to a reservation and harvesting food from the land and cooking a meal with that. And this grandmother came up to her crying, like, I don't know what spice or herb did you use? Because I haven't tasted that taste since I was a little girl. And there was nothing in the food that this woman hadn't already been eating, no
Yeah.
particular herb, but it was
Yeah.
the fact that it was direct from the land that
Yeah.
she's walking. And so Dana came and spoke at the conference and left everybody in tears. I can feel the emotion rising within me right now. And it was this beautiful weaving of, hey, here's how we do it. Here's the importance of the connection with land and food. And it was one of the highlights of our Ayurveda conference. And so all that it was the inspiration for this theme. And yeah, just always coming back to those relationships. And so on Sunday morning of the conference, we're going to have a panel discussion. We'll have two panel discussions Sunday morning. One is going to be on Indigenous astronomy. So we'll get into the different understandings of, stories of different constellations from different traditions, and accessing, Chinese astrology and Vedic astrology and Indigenous astronomy and all these different stories. So that'll be one. The other one is going to be all about community building. And so many people talk about community and the importance of community, and yet very few of us know how to do it. And most of these intentional communities, conscious spiritual villages, fail within the first 3 years because of sex, power, money, who's making the decisions, who's controlling the purse. And we have all these ideals of like, oh, I just want to start a village with my friends. And people are annoying, right? We don't necessarily have the skills or know-how of how to create that sustainable, regenerative community. And yet we all have this innate knowing that that's the key, is how are we able to be in healthy relationship internally with all the different parts that constitute the whole of our own psyche and our own bodies? That's a starting place. How are we then in healthy relationship with each other? Even like, do you know your neighbors? Do you agree with them politically? Who cares? What resources can you share? And what is your common humanity as individuals who share the land that you're on? And then, extrapolating beyond that to the larger culture as a whole. And so that community building, that relationship with ourselves, each other, and the land that we inhabit is of vital importance, and is really the context within which any healing can happen.
Yeah. It was just reminding me, I have a friend who's just like really in the thick of it with cancer. And I offered her, I'm like, do you want us to like do a healing circle? Do you want to come and just like be held within a container? And I was thinking about it because that's like the easiest thing for me to do for someone. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's the fastest, easiest way for me to provide the most to her community, to like the people around, like, because I'm in large part like a facilitator. But I do find that like we don't know how to connect, because I've run courses or clubs or these basically online intentional communities, which I now call clubs, for a long time, since 2007, so almost 2 decades. What I've seen is that the skill set of committing to a group of people, and I love how Seth Godin talks about it in his book Tribes, which is like people need a mission, like a shared vision and mission, and a way to communicate. It's like it comes down to like that simple thing. And so for right now, some of that uh, for some people might be more around a specific interest, like a specific topic of like that's our vision and mission, and then deciding how are we communicating, and then part of that vision mission is like what are we actually committing to. And I love how David Block in his book Community, I believe it is called Community, he's kind of like, and it's like, what do you actually care about? Like, what do you give a shit about? Like enough to actually show up for it. So if you're just talking about these things that you're angry about that you don't actually take action on to change, then it's not that. And stop doing that is sort of his point. And I've heard David Nagel I've shared the same thing that he learned from his teacher, Bob Proctor, which is like, if you're talking about things that you can't change, that means like anything that you're actually trying to change in your life, anyway, you're trying to connect or transform is really weakened because there's not that differential in your awareness. So to me, this drive into community is like, what are we choosing to do energetically and physically together? Like, how are we choosing our mission? Which a mission usually means that something is present in the future that's not present right now. So, what is that? Can we define that? And then, can we commit to that? And then, how do we want to connect? And then, what is our commitment really going to look like? So, I look forward to that. I really look forward to being part of this evolving body of work that's now falling under Ayurveda. I'm curious. Okay, my last question, David, is like, what do you want me to talk about, or where do you think I can be of most benefit to the Indigenous
Ooh,
Ayurveda conference?
interesting. So, I think your experience, expertise, and like, yeah, you literally wrote a book called Primal Habits or Uninflamed, right? And so, but what I'm really interested in is the living practice and your lived concrete experience, and what are some of the daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal ways that you take there are thousands of Ayurvedic habits that somebody might adopt, and sometimes that's paralyzing, where it's like, well, I should be scraping my tongue and doing abhyanga and meditating with the sunrise. There's a reason Ayurveda is called the king's medicine. One, because it's the best medicine, but also because you have to be a king to have a whole staff of people to do your 6-hour morning routine, right? And so I'm always interested in this, what the distance between the ideal and the actual is the
Mm,
measure of our suffering in so many ways. And so I know that you have a bunch of really practical daily things that you're doing to that are in alignment with these primal habits, these universal roots that can be categorized and explained according to Ayurveda, but
mm,
we sort of again want to go to like the prehistory. What's before it was codified as Ayurveda? What's
mm,
before it was codified as this or that? What is it? Getting to the roots of what is it to be human on Earth? And
mm,
what are the ways that we can interact with our environment with skill and intelligence? And so that sort of points in the direction of primal habits. But does that sound
mhm.
good? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and it's funny. There's a few thoughts. One is, so we have like the king's medicine, and then we also have the people's medicine. So there's a
Right.
bit of that both.
Yeah.
And then what I'm hearing is that like, how do we restore that more prehistoric people's medicine that gave rise to this exquisite, Vedic codification of theory, and make it so that like, what's the biggest bang for your buck in terms of if you only have like 10 minutes to get ready for the day, like where can you have the most bang for your buck and just feeling great all day from that 10 minutes? And then maybe where do we find the roots of those habits indigenously in all cultures?
Yeah, love that. And what you're saying before about, what's the simplest way you can create the biggest impact for your friend who's navigating cancer? This is what Buckminster Fuller calls a trim tab. And it is the point of greatest leverage where the smallest amount of effort creates the maximum impact. And so the trim tab is this little flap on the rudder of a big ship. And so because if you've got a big ship moving quickly through a body of water, it takes a long time and a lot of energy to get that rudder to move to then turn the boat. But there's this little flap that turns first. and it's at the
Mm-hmm.
point of greatest leverage, geometrically on the rudder, and it first turns in the opposite direction from the direction you want the bigger rudder to move, because that
Mm-hmm.
then creates this dynamic flow that it's like the rudder of the rudder. And so that, again, Buckminster Fuller's term trim tab. And so you've spoken to it in a couple ways, and that in a lot of ways is what Ayurveda is for me, where you don't, okay, if you've got a rash, you could put a topical cream on it or whatever, but you could also take a little bit of neem, and that's gonna clear out your liver, get that functioning more clearly. That's going to clean your blood, and the rash is going to disappear on its own. So, what's the minimum effort for maximum impact? And understanding that it's all systemic. You can't change one thing without changing everything. And so, in your own health and wellness, what is that? In your community, what is that point of greatest leverage? And then, it's really easy to be overwhelmed by all the changes, the chaotic transitional world that we're living in. Okay, as opposed to being paralyzed by, well, we need to change this massive global system. It's like, okay, probably not going to do that by yourself, but what
Right.
is the trim tab for your impact in that global system? And that's what I'm interested in.
Yay. Yay. I love it. Well, I'm really excited about coming. I know people listening are like, where was that again? So Colorado Ayurveda Conference.com. There's early bird tickets on sale. And I know last time for me going to Colorado, I'm going to the Trauma Informed Conference and meeting Dana was, very, very moved. I really enjoyed connecting with her after as well. Is that it was so great to see so many of my old friends and clients, members, and just, you guys just do an amazing job. Like, I know for you, this is passion and it really comes through. So if anyone's kind of wondering, should I go or not? I go. I love it. And I don't love all Ayurveda conferences equally either. Yay to
Yeah, we
that.
definitely take pride in being slightly on the rebellious side and doing it a little differently. So, I mean, one of the things
Amazing.
there's going to be amazing music and dance
Mm.
at our conference. So, one of our mutual friends, Valerie Beck,
Yeah.
is gonna bring some like capoeira inspired morning movement, and then we've got Snow
She's
Raven.
amazing. She did that at the Alta event. She had like everyone doing like just hip hop dancing on my lawn. Yeah, Valerie's
Yeah.
amazing.
Love that. And then on the Friday and Saturday night, we've got Snow Raven, who's an indigenous
Oh
singer and
yeah.
music producer from the Republic of Sakha in Arctic Siberia. And if you don't know Snow Raven, YouTube her, find some of her.
Yeah.
It is
Unbelievable. She's
wild.
unbelievable. Yeah.
And we've also got
Oh,
Ayla Nerio coming to perform and sing. She's amazing, permaculture activist and singer-songwriter, amazing, beautiful human. And we'll have a discount code customized for your people. So we'll put that in the show notes when we figure out what exactly that code is. So yeah, really excited to see everybody in Colorado in October. We're on Instagram at Colorado Ayurveda, ColoradoAyurvedaConference.com. We're Colorama, the Colorado Ayurvedic Medical Association, is found at coloradoayurveda.org. We got a bunch of resources there. And yeah, great to talk to you. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to chat.
yeah. Likewise. Likewise, Dave. All right, you guys. Hello, listeners. So I have created for the wellness pros out there who listen to this show, the Wellness Pro Launchpad, and I'll get you in for free. Just go to wellnesspro.academy /launchpad, LAUNCHPAD, Launchpad, and then just fill out the form and we'll get you right into this school classroom in here. And in the Launchpad, it's really cool. Like, you get to see yourself as the hero in the path of the Wellness Pro, and then your client's transformation in A to B, and your vibe and your brand, your investment story, and design the journey for your clients, patients, or students, and then how to price from results. So these lessons are super short. They're each about 10 minutes, and you'll have a reframe on how to launch and scale the next phase of your wellness career. So wellnesspro.academy /launchpad, and then and on the inside, if you really want to launch, you can, like, your next phase of growth as a wellness pro, then you can talk to me. See you soon.